Welcome to this LinkedIn Live broadcast where I'm going to be talking about how to tackle pricing in bids. I've been working in bids now for 15 years, worked with bid teams across the UK and Ireland, and have picked up a huge amount of information and intel as I've gone along my journey in bidding. While I've not personally been handling the pricing usually within the bids, I've certainly been around when pricing decisions have been getting made and pricing strategies and bids have been getting looked at in terms of bid, no bid, and pricing to win, all kinds of pricing and commercial discussions. So what I'm going to do is just try and distill some of that experience into some hints and tips I would recommend bidders to be thinking about who are pricing bids. Now, of course, in private sector proposals, your price is going to be quite important. Often it can be the deciding factor where perhaps 3 or 4 very similar organisations or offerings that are being looked at, then price is going to be very big decider. But even in private sector proposals, you would want to be articulating your value, especially your added value and what you're delivering and why perhaps the lowest price, what the lowest price isn't necessarily going to cover. Never talk about other bidders, of course, but you really want to articulate your offering. But today, what I'm really going to be focused on is public sector bidding. Now, public sector bidding is something where the price quality split is known. It's known upfront. It has to be advertised with the contract notice by law. So you'll actually know what percentage of this bid is going to be evaluated on price and what percentage on quality. So if it's 50-50, for example, then that sounds like the price has got equal importance to the quality. If it's 80% price and 20% quality, then price is obviously much more important here. If it's the other way around and it is 80% quality, then price is naturally then of lesser importance, but it's never unimportant. So if you think about it, what you want to be able to do is maximize the marks that you can get, particularly on the quality section. You want to score as highly as possible on the quality section, and that can perhaps allow for where you are not the absolute cheapest bidder, because the cheapest bidder in the public sector is going to be awarded usually the maximum points for price. So if you had that 80% price split and your prices were significantly higher than other bidders, it's almost no matter how good you were on quality, you probably would still lose here. In something that's a bit more weighted towards quality, 60, 70, 80% quality, then obviously you can win the bid without being the cheapest price. It's possible even to win 50-50 bids, 50% price, 50% quality, where you are not the cheapest bidder. The ideal scenario, of course, is where you're about 4th on price and 1st on quality, but 1st overall. So you actually win the bid, but at a good price that you're still able to make a reasonable or even better than reasonable return on. So that brings me to the question of, if you were a supermarket, which type of supermarket would you be? Now, we know the supermarkets all do a similar thing. They all sell us food. But that is perhaps where a lot of the similarities end. So the supermarkets are almost on a spectrum or scale from very high price, high quality, and we think of brands like Waitrose, perhaps, Booths in the north of England, Marks and Spencer's. These sort of brands we sort of associate with high price, high quality, high customer service. And then there's other brands, perhaps like Tesco's and Sainsbury's, And then as we continue on, we find there's maybe brands that are sort of more in the middle, and then there's brands that are very much looking for the budget shopper, people where price is a key determinant. They're obviously going to be interested or have some interest in the quality, but it's not the overriding buying decision here. So working out which sort of supermarket you are is something that is very good for any organisation that is engaged in bidding, particularly where they're bidding to the public sector. So if you work out that your organisation is like a Waitrose, you're high price, high quality, then if something is advertised as having a very high weighting towards price, then that probably isn't for you. I say probably isn't. There may be circumstances where it kind of still might be, but generally speaking, what you want to do is you want to match that you're going for opportunities that you are likely to win or likely to have a good prospect of winning. And that is going to happen when you match the opportunities with what the client's budget is and what their expectations are with what you have to offer and the sort of prices you charge. And that brings me to the point of, do you know what your place is within the market? Do you know relative to your competitors, whether you're expensive, whether you're around the middle, or whether you are consistently cheaper than your competitors? Also, if you ask the supermarket question, I remember asking this question when I was interviewing 14 different people, when I was looking at the strategy and the processes that were going on within a very large national firm. And I asked 14 people that were involved in bidding, asked them separately. I showed them 9 supermarket logos and said, which one is this business? And can you believe that of 14 people, I got 8 different answers? So what that meant was there wasn't actually in that organisation a shared understanding of what they were as an organisation in terms of how they were facing into their markets, how they were perceived, and their relative positioning. So it is important to understand that, not just to be able to look outwards, but look inwards as well as an organisation. Be honest with yourself, and what that might mean is that you're not necessarily able to go for everything. Now, some supermarkets quite cleverly present themselves to a number of different customer groups. So they might have a finest range or a best of range or something like that for people that want to pay a bit more and get a bit more in quality terms. They might have a more normal range, and then they might have a budget range, perhaps a bit lower quality for people that are really watching the pennies when it comes to their buying decisions. Now, as an organisation, are you able to do that? Many organisations either can't do that or don't want to do that. They set out their stall. Their stall is either their budget, either their middle, or their high end, and they should be going for opportunities accordingly. So that, if I was going to give you 10 top tips around the pricing, the first one I've given you there is understand your market position. So in this LinkedIn Live broadcast today, I'm talking about how to tackle pricing in bids, and I'm going to give you my 10 top tips. The second one is, when you get the tender documents, interrogate the specification and also the pricing matrix while having regard to the scoring of the pricing. So what do I mean there? Well, with the specification, you want to be really clear on what's in spec and what's out of spec. You want to be clear within your own organisation where you can actually potentially add value. Is there scope for efficiencies here? Is there scope, for example, for delivering a programme a bit quicker and perhaps getting a bit of a cost saving or getting some kind of performance bonus? What scope is there for efficiencies? Perhaps if it's in construction and in the professional services particularly attached to it, you're going to look at value engineering. Is that something that perhaps the client would be either willing to consider or you would be able to do? But of course, we're mindful of situations like Grenville, and we need to be very, very careful in any kind of value engineering that health and safety is not compromised. Take a look as well at what the client has advertised the contract value as, and do you think that that is appropriate? Working on one thing recently, it was a contract value that was advertised, but the actual cost of delivering the contract for most suppliers was going to be more than 100% greater than the client had advertised. So we had to go back to them and question it. We had to say, you know, you're asking for actually 30,000 hours of work a year. And if we looked at that and looked at what you're giving as the budget for this contract, well, it's not even the minimum wage, never mind the additional costs that the contractors would have here. So don't be afraid to interrogate the specification and also look at the pricing. Look at the pricing matrix as well. A tip is perhaps create a bit of a straw person contract, as it were, and just start, getting your estimating people that work on the pricing to start inputting some prices. Get them playing around with the spreadsheet or the pricing matrix. Make sure it works. Make sure there's not cells that are perhaps being set to have some kind of impact that they shouldn't have, or perhaps cells that you need to populate, but you're unable to populate them because they've been protected. So you want to get all of this sorted out at an early stage, and any anomalies that you come across, you want to be feeding these through as clarifications to the buyer. And also be thinking about the scoring of it. Make sure that the scoring of it appears fair to you. It's much easier to raise questions and to get things changed during the bid process. Then you don't want to be in a situation where you're getting feedback that you've lost out on a bid, and you then start looking back and think, do you know what? I don't think that scoring matrix was very fair. Well, yes, there are perhaps opportunities that you may have to challenge, but a public sector organisation could just play hardball. They're probably not going to want to redo everything, and it could be that you're faced with taking court action if you really feel that something around the evaluation was unfair. And that is a route that we very rarely would be suggesting that organisations go through. So what we'd recommend is that you interrogate things closely as soon as you get the documents and ask the questions. The questions can be asked as well to your advantage. So my third top tip on pricing is use the clarification questions to your advantage. Also use them tactically. Now, what do I mean here? Well, what we say to our clients is, if you were going to be delivering this contract for the lowest possible price, or you think that others might be thinking about doing this, what shortcuts would they take? What would they miss out? What would they hope wouldn't get noticed? What perhaps would they look to substitute with either cheaper people, materials, etc.? Where also might they be looking for variations where they're actually going to go back to the client and start charging more or looking to get more? Then what we do is we try to flush out all of these with clarifications where we get the buyer to give clarity on these points. Yes, this you must include. You must also include that. That is something you don't have to include, but you could get a variation, you could get additional payment for doing that. We don't think we'll need it very often, etc. So what this means is that the bidders are then all in possession of the same facts and all able to price accordingly. And that has the effect of actually bringing the prices a lot closer together. And once the prices are closer together, it tends to flatten out the impact of widely differing prices. And then, of course, the attention goes on the technical quality side, which if you've written a brilliant bid, a very compelling bid, then you're going to score very well in the technical quality, and hopefully your pricing will be competitive enough as well to see you cross the line as the winner and being awarded the contract. So that was tip number 3, to use the clarification questions to your advantage, to use them tactically. Just to say as well, if there's ever chuppy around a bid, that often the buyers are going to want to stand aside from that and say, well, it's nothing to do with us, that's between suppliers. But you want to know if there is an incumbent supplier working here, if they have chuppy eligible staff, and you want to try to get information. It might be the buyer doesn't necessarily provide it, they might facilitate it, or they might ask their supplier to make this information available. So you really want to understand this. And particularly if you also are the incumbent supplier, then you may decide that sometimes there's tactical advantages to issuing the chuppy list to the bidders. So as the bidders actually see what is involved in delivering this contract, it could be that there are bidders that are not as experienced here, and they might think, do you know what, this contract's easier to do than maybe it really is. So where you're the incumbent supplier, you can make a decision to put some information out there to the bidders. Also, where you're the incumbent supplier, then on that tactical question point, you know what things have cost you money. You know the pain points that there are in this contract. I asked one supplier recently what the pain points were with the contract they were on, and they said, well, the pain point is that the contract manager at the client end never told us originally. We didn't know within the bid that we'd have to produce a weekly performance report. And they said it's taking somebody in our office about a day to produce this weekly performance report. Now, you times that across a 4-year period, say, and you have quite it's a sizable cost. I say sizable, it might be several tens of thousands of pounds, which you might think, oh, do you know what, on a contract perhaps worth hundreds of thousands or a few million, it's not that much. But we often see that bids are decided and pricing involved in bids can be extremely competitive. You could be 0.1% out on pricing, and that could be enough to lose you the bid. So where you're the incumbent supplier and you know that certain things actually cost you a lot more than you thought were going to cost when you were bidding, then they're probably going to cost other bidders exactly the same if they were successful in being awarded the contract. So just ask, questions like, for the avoidance of doubt, can you please clarify whether there are any management reports required? What is the frequency of these reports, and what information would they need to contain? Now, asking a question like that will elicit, no doubt, a lot of information, and then all the bidders are pricing the same thing here. My tip number 4 is implement a zero-based pricing model. Now, what am I talking about there? Well, rather than just look at the contract value or the budget or what you think is going to be needed to win this contract, yes, you do want to be having these considerations, but I would suggest that you actually build your zero-based pricing model. You actually look at what are the costs going to be for delivering this contract, and build up your pricing model accordingly. And don't forget to allow a reasonable rate of profit as well. You'll have to make a commercial decision on just how much profit. And as you build up the zero-based pricing model, if you identify things that you think other bidders are maybe not going to be pricing in, again, remember these for the clarifications. It's so important that you get clarity on these things and everybody is pricing the same thing. Number 5 tip is look for efficiencies. So what efficiencies do you think you could have on this contract? Also, it could be a contract that's going to last for quite a number of years. So you need to think about your sector and how it's changing, and perhaps what opportunities there could be for artificial intelligence as one example. Is that going to be something that can feature here? Is it something where you can actually save money because of using it? There's robotics, there's automation, there's all kinds of things where you should be thinking about, can I deliver this more efficiently? It doesn't necessarily have to be done the way it has traditionally been done. However, you have to walk the talk. With one legal services bid I was involved in recently, my client was talking about some great things, some great efficiencies, and this was around including artificial intelligence. It was also offshoring certain aspects of the work as well. So they said we're able to get sort of 15% efficiencies here because of that, and they were going to write about that within their technical response. So I said, well, that's fine. That sounds really good. How does that relate to your pricing? And they said, oh, we're actually one of the more expensive legal firms. I said, well, you've got a disconnect here. So the buyer's going to be reading about the great efficiencies that you're able to demonstrate, but then they're going to find when they look at your pricing, you're one of the more expensive. So this is problematic. So what you have to do is you have to bank the savings. You have to cash that check. If you're saying that you can deliver efficiencies, then your price should be a bit cheaper as well. And that's so important in this market where we're looking at, scores being awarded for both price and quality. As far as efficiencies as well, you want to look at your subcontractors, you want to look at your supply chain, you want to maybe tell them about the contract. We've got this contract opportunity, it's X million or X hundreds of thousands for Y number of years. If we get that, we'll be using you in the following ways. You could expect this much business coming through it, provided we get, the contract spent coming through. Therefore, can you take a look at your prices? Can you sharpen your pencil? What is happening within, for example, the labour markets? We know at the moment that in some sectors there are a lot more people available than there were before the COVID crisis. So rates perhaps are being looked at there as well. So really examine your costs and tell the story to your subcontractors and your supply chain about the opportunity. You may not want to tell them the exact opportunity, but you might want to say, if we win this contract of X, what saving can you provide us? Number 6 is what's your labour costs. Labour costs in a lot of the contracts are going to be quite a sizable part. So really take a hard look at your labour costs. Take a look at things like pay rises, etc. What is being done. Take a look at your competitors, but you want to look at retention as well, because retaining staff is very important. But what's happening in terms of labour costs, in terms of national insurance charges, in terms of pensions, the cost of employer provided pensions, etc. And you want to model that out within your pricing. Also involved are recruitment costs, are the availability of staff as well. And if you don't have your own in-house staff, and sometimes you're maybe having to go to agencies, then again, it's availability. And in a supply and demand type market, could the cost rise as well? Also, with not just the labour costs, but generally, you want to be thinking about how much this contract is going to be used. What is it you're having to price? Are you having to price all the service delivery of a particular thing and give a commitment to do it for that price? Well, what if the service usage goes up? I once heard of a contract where they were pricing it based on 2,500 service users per year. It actually ended up at double that, but their pricing didn't move up quite as much. So you want to get into the detail of the contract, and if it was going to be used more, then is that a good thing? Usually it would be, provided you're getting paid for it, but again, just be careful there as well. The next thing that I want to speak about is building contingencies in. So that's tip number 7, build contingencies into your pricing. So we've just had some really bad weather in different parts of the country. That could mean that things are slower to be delivered, things might cost more, so that's one contingency. It could be we get a really bad winter, we get these every few years. What effect would that have? So start building some of these things in. However, don't build in too much risk, because you're going to also have to make commercial decisions. So some of these risks that you look at, they might happen, they might not. So you don't want to look at every risk and price every single risk in as if it's going to happen, because that would obviously make you uncompetitive. But neither can you have a completely blasé attitude around risk, because if a number of the risks happen, or the bigger risks happen, and you don't have contingencies in your pricing, then this is going to be really difficult, and sometimes organizations even end up going out of business because they've lost their shirt on a contract. They've gone in too cheap to win it, and actually it's ended up being the worst thing maybe that's ever happened to their business. Number 8 on the pricing tips is to think about, the big sort of geopolitical things that are happening. So obviously Britain has exited the European Union. However, for the next few months, we're still on the same trade deal that we had before. However, once that changes, then, any future trade deals, what are they going to be like for your sector? What if there's no trade deal? And we're sort of into the World Trade Organization tariff type situations. What effect would that have on you? What are the change control provisions within the contract? What can trigger sort of repricing, or is it just something that's done annually? And if it's done annually, what is the reference point? Is it being done against some kind of price index or labour indices or something else that's recognised within your sector? Also, what happens if there's currency fluctuations, following the end of the current trading agreement? We know what happened after the Brexit referendum was that the price of sterling plummeted quite a bit. That meant that the costs of materials that you were buying in from anywhere out with the UK ended up costing more money to bring things in. And if you need to bring things in, then that obviously is going to impact on you. It could also be availability of labour as well. We know there's not the same availability of European Union national labour as there has been in recent years. And if that's something that's very important in the delivery of your service, as it is in sectors like construction, hospitality, care, just to name a few, then if labour is not as available, then you need to think about what that does to your costs. There's other things that could potentially happen. Scottish referendum, another referendum in Scotland. What impact would that have on your business? Maybe if you're in Scotland, or perhaps bidding into Scotland as well. So just things that nobody knows all the answers to all of this, but as far as your pricing goes, but there are considerations that, particularly where you're looking at these multi-year contracts, then you definitely want to be thinking about. Tip number 9 is around challenging your pricing. The best bidders, the super bidders as I call them, they've started early on the pricing. They have not only done that, they've done the things that I've said so far, but then they go into adjudication of pricing, where actually a number of people within the organisation take a look at the pricing, perhaps through a few different lenses, and make sure that this pricing is competitive, but it's profitable, and it's a contract that is deliverable. So there is that number of people adjudicating on the pricing. Sometimes as well, particularly if it's a big must-win contract, a strategic contract, or maybe you're entering new markets, then it would definitely be good to get some external specialist assistance with your pricing, and there's some very good cost consultants out there. Tip number 10, and the final tip in this broadcast on, how to tackle pricing in your bids, is to get feedback. You want to understand feedback on your pricing. You want to be given, your pricing scores, and also how these scores related to the winning bidder, for example. If you're unsuccessful, it's great if you can see all of the scores that were submitted. It might say things like bidder A, bidder B, bidder C, bidder D, whatever, but you then see the various prices that other bidders were going in at. So the more information you can get, the better. If it's a private sector proposal and you've been told that you lost on price, then again, go back to the procurement department, ask a little bit more. But it could be as well that you've maybe got business development, account management, or relationship salespeople who have maybe know people within that organisation. They can do a little bit more digging to get below the fact that, okay, maybe you lost on price, but you want to know maybe by how much. You want to also understand, if possible, if your value proposition, didn't actually come through to them, and that the buyer here didn't feel that you represented the best value for their business. I think we all know that cheapest isn't always the best, but we have to make sure that we're telling the story in a way that's going to resonate with buyers making decisions. It's great if there's pre-market testing goes on. So an example in the utility sector recently, where the buyers put out their pricing matrix and said, look, this is what we're going to be pricing on, and this is how it's going to be scored. And I thought that was a really good example, because that went out in the pre-market testing arrangements. So as people got to see that and got to see what was involved. Watch as well any tendency within your organisation to want to win everything on lowest price. We can all think of organisations that have won too many tenders at the lowest price. They've found that they can't deliver them, or when circumstances change or any small little change happens, it just knocks things over. So you need to make sure that you've got a contingency in here. I need to make sure that your organisation financially can weather certain things. I knew an organisation who had got a contract with a social housing organisation, and it was to fit new double glazed windows within tower blocks. But actually something changed. Asbestos was discovered within the tower block, and that had to be cleared out first before they were going to put the new windows in. So the supplier here was actually stuck, having bought all the new windows, but was only going to get paid under the contract once they had fitted them. So you just need to be, expect the unexpected sometimes as well, and make sure that as an organisation you're robust enough financially to see your way through things. And goodness, we've all been tested with COVID-19 as well, and the lockdowns, restrictions on work, etc. So if your organisation is surviving that, then that has certainly been an example where your business contingency, financial resilience plan has really been put to the test. So finally, in the words of Kenny Rogers, that well-known bidder, but just think about one of his songs, The Gambler. He said, know when to walk away. And I think that is so important as well. Know when this is not one for you. It might even be that, as you're asking quite specific clarification questions, maybe the answers you're getting back show you that this is a client who's maybe not looking for necessarily risk sharing, is not looking to work in a spirit of partnership working. You're getting the feeling this is going to be, a relationship that is not necessarily going to go well. So just be really clear about the certain contracts that you don't want to win. And if you don't want to win it, walk away, learn the lessons early. It's much better to walk away from a bid than to be several years into a contract that's just absolutely hemorrhaging money. So there's lots of benefits that external bid and cost consultants can bring in as well to your organisation, perhaps taking a look at at what you're doing, looking at your metrics, understanding things for you, explaining things, what's going on in the market, and steps that you can perhaps take to get yourself into a better position on pricing. So having done, I think now about 10 LinkedIn Lives, I've done them every working day since I got the LinkedIn Live broadcasting. I'm going to take a day off tomorrow, and my next LinkedIn Live is going to be on Monday at 12 noon. And on Monday at 12 noon, I'm going to be talking about how to get ready for a bid. This is where you know that a bid's coming to the market. What steps can you take as an organisation to get yourself ready for that? So thank you very much for listening to this particular LinkedIn Live broadcast on how to tackle pricing in bids.